We're good. We're good to go. Oh, now we know. This is real. It's live. It's happening.
It's live and in person.
Let's jump in. Let's do it. If people want to come in late, we'll scold them.
No, we won't scold them. Come in. It's okay.
So welcome all
everyone.
of you here in person. Welcome to all of you listening online, right? Yes, great.
Okay, good.
Welcome to all of you listening online. We're really excited to be here in person this year at QCF. Last year, we both did a live recording, but it was online, and I was in El Salvador while we were doing it.
Yes, that's true.
So It's nice to be in cold DC instead.
There's not going to be any glitches.
No,
I'm not going to see your picture waver or anything. But
so why don't you explain who we are and our podcast, and then we can jump right in on today's topic.
So this is the Life on Side B podcast, live episode coming from QCF. The podcast has been going for, I think this is the fourth season.
I think it's the fifth season.
Fifth season? Gosh, 4 years, something like that. So my name's Grant. My pronouns are he, him. I've been a part of the podcast for the past 3 years.
And I'm Elizabeth, she, her, and this will be my second season.
Yes.
So I'm the newbie.
Yeah, technically, I suppose
I'm still
you
a baby.
But the podcast, we're at the Brian M. Eckstein podcast stage at QCF. I forgot to mention that. Someone's holding up a sign. Thank you so much. And yes, the podcast is really exploring the lives of Side B LGBTQ Christians from lots of different angles. We have lots of guests. We've talked about lots of different subtopics within the Side B experience. And so we're really excited this season to talk about sort of this theme of reclaiming, which I think is familiar to a lot of us, reclamation. So we're going to be talking about a lot of different things that we feel have been perhaps taken from us or tainted by our experiences in our church settings, our faith communities, and how we can go about taking those things back as positive aspects of our spirituality and not just bad memories or scars that we have.
Exactly. So like each episode, we're going to have a concept or a theme that we are reclaiming as queer Christians. So I'm really excited about this season and where it's going to go. And today we're specifically reclaiming the concept of intimacy and the nature of intimacy. So it should be a spicy one.
I hope so.
And love to get all of your feedback and thoughts. So we are going to have some time for Q&A at the end. So if you can start thinking of questions now and you want to throw them into the app, please feel free to start putting some questions in there. But I will say that because we're going to be really focusing on reclaiming intimacy, though we are more than happy to talk about questions around Side B. And obviously we're going to be coming at it from an angle of Side B. We're not necessarily going to talk about broader Side B concepts, if that makes sense. So if there are things around intimacy and the Side B experience that you guys have questions about, please throw them at us. We'd love to engage with those.
And we'd love, if you have other questions about Side B, we would love to meet with you afterward and chat.
Yes, please.
I'd love to chat over coffee in a very non-threatening way. I know there's a lot of baggage with that. It's not a trap, I promise.
It's not a trap. No, it is a trap. It is often very much a trap.
But not this time. Not
this time around.
So
Grant, let me ask you, what does it look like, or what is the need? Why is there a need to reclaim the concept of intimacy? Why does intimacy need to be reclaimed? And I would say, starting off within the broader Christian queer experience, why do we need to reclaim this idea of intimacy?
Yeah. Well, I think the things that come to mind for me when it comes to reclaiming intimacy as a queer Christian is it feels like for much of my young life, before I was able to really reconcile my faith and sexuality, intimacy was something always out of reach, something that I wasn't allowed to have, or that maybe it was cast as like intimacy is something that you can get in marriage eventually. And we're just preparing you for that. So intimacy is not for now.
Yes,
it's
yes.
for later. And I think over many years, I think that's evolved as I've found myself in different communities. I think there can be another iteration of that that's really in a lot of ways pro-queer, pro-LGBTQ, but still sort of places intimacy in marriage. And for me, that's not something I plan on entering into.
Yeah.
So celibacy, or I'm always going to do that. The words sound too similar. Intimacy, it feels out of reach.
Yeah.
And so reclaiming it, reclaiming the idea that intimacy is something that I can have in my life. It's something that's a part of the real abundant life that Jesus promises us.
Yeah. Well, and I think like within the Christian experience, which is how I posed the question, but now I'm thinking it needs to be reclaimed even broader within the LGBTQ conversation, because as queer people, we have been kind of robbed of intimacy just altogether, like intimacy from family, like historically and still today being kicked out of homes, intimacy from friends and like church and community relationships. And then, being told historically that you can't get married in same-sex partnerships, that is another way of robbing of intimacy. So it's like a constant, and like it being illegal for two people of the same sex to have any kind of physical intimacy. And I think for a long time, it's still on the books in many places. So I think there just we have a lot of levels to dig through when we think about how do we reclaim this concept and make it our own as queer folks, and then as queer Christians. And then on top of that, for us as those who identify in the side B world.
Yeah. Yes. That brought so much to mind.
Come on, give it to me.
Honestly, do you ever feel, this is a question for everybody, I guess, but do you ever get a flashback of like junior high? That comes out of nowhere
all the time.
And you're like, oh no. But I think what comes to mind for me is how I felt when I was very young, going to like a Bible camp, which I went to, not that kind, but I mean, it wasn't that specifically, but the idea that young same-sex attracted gay, bi people, there's rules against having intimacy with people of a different sex or gender. And there's this weird shame associated with having intimacy, any kind of intimacy with people of the same sex or gender. And so you just sort of get trapped where you're not supposed to be alone with men or women or anyone different or anyone the same. And you just go home to your bed and you just
cry
stay
in your bed alone.
You cry alone. And I think that's the predicament, that it's not just queer people in the church. I think it's symptomatic of the culture in a lot of ways too. I think, I heard this many, many years ago, but it really resonated with me. An obsession about sex and marriage can also mask a real fear of intimacy.
Absolutely.
So I think that's something to wrestle through.
So true.
As well.
Well, yeah. And I think about like my straight friends and family members, and like that whole Billy Graham rule of not being in the same room with somebody. I went to a Bible college and we had a similar rule that you couldn't be in the same room with somebody of the opposite sex, but you also couldn't be in a standing vehicle with somebody of the opposite sex. Like it couldn't be just, So my brother came to visit me one day, and like we're driving into the campus and he goes to stop to like give me a hug and say bye. And I was like, don't stop, keep the car rolling, keep it rolling. And I'm like rolling out of the openly moving car just so I couldn't get caught being in a standing car with my brother, which makes zero sense. I take things way too far. That's just who I am. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a thing. And I think that way even now of like, if I have to follow those very like strict binary roles of you can't be in a room alone with somebody of the opposite sex or somebody that you're sexually attracted to in the gender sphere, I can't be in the room with anybody ever. So then I can only be intimate with my spouse, and it robs me of intimate relationships in other ways.
For sure.
And that's really sad. And I think straight people are getting robbed from that too, because like, as a straight person, you should be able, as a straight male, you should be able to have a really amazing, intimate and respectful relationship with a woman that you're not like afraid of, because who knows, 1 second you're having a deep, like personal conversation and the next, like you're having their child. Like that's not how it works. I have 2. It's not how it works. I think we all probably know that's not how it works. So
it's kind of frightening where those assumptions, like what those assumptions say about how people must feel in relationship with people to whom they may be attracted. Like the assumption is that you're going to get in trouble is like, oh, so you're just thinking about sex all the time. And it could happen at any moment. So you can drop your pants and then just like, that's, I don't know. And I don't think people are actually
that's why
feeling
I wear
that.
A dress so that it's just easier. Okay, so you said something to me earlier when we were talking about this in particular. You had said something that really needs to be reclaimed when thinking about queer intimacy is on kind of both sides of the extreme kind of spectrum of theological approach or sexual expression, that both in conservative spaces, which we've kind of touched on, we need to reclaim intimacy for ourselves, but even in progressive spaces. So I would love to hear more and have our audience hear more about what you kind of meant by that and what that looks like.
Yeah, I think the same kind of lie that happens in conservative spaces about intimacy, that it can only be found in sex and marriage, can be unwittingly reiterated in progressive spaces where sex, the boundaries of sex and marriage are different. So nothing fundamentally changes about that lie. It's just, it has a broader context, and it could actually do in some ways more damage. There's no comparison. I don't want to compare progressive and conservative sides, whatever those words mean.
Yeah.
But I think that lie can continue on if you don't address it directly. Being more open to having sexual or romantic relationships of various kinds or with different people is not going to fix that lie. It's just going to ingrain it more deeply. Yeah.
I think it reminds me of like when people have said, less to me, but to some of my other friends who are celibate, like, oh, I feel so sorry for you. Like, you will never experience intimacy. Like, I just wish for you, fill in the blank. And though, like, I know their hearts are in a right place, and maybe for them, like, the way that we experience intimacy is going to be different for different people. So maybe for them, the reason why they have that very like sorrowful stance is because here I say, I need to tell everybody to silence their phone, and my phone goes off.
That's okay.
Sorry, everybody. But maybe that's the way that they connect with intimacy, is only through like sexual experiences. But it's not fair to kind of put that on someone else to say, like, because you're not going to have sex with somebody, then poor you, like you're not experiencing true intimacy.
Yeah.
So then the question is like, what is intimacy?
Yeah. I would love to hear from you as a married person who has the
potential,
the magical experience of having intimacy, according to much of the world.
Sexual intimacy.
Yes. Yeah. You have that. I've never had that. And for a lot of people, that means that you've had intimacy and I haven't had intimacy.
Yeah, exactly.
How have you experienced intimacy, not just in your marriage and but beyond your marriage? How has that changed over time? What have been some of the most intimate experiences you've had with people?
Sure. So I think in my marriage, for example, and I was talking to a friend about this yesterday. Okay, coming from a conservative Southern Baptist background and then going to a conservative Christian college, I'm sure many of you have heard this narrative that it was like if it was a husband and a wife, a man and a woman marriage relationship, it's the woman's duty to like fulfill their male partner's desire. And I can't tell you how many times I heard that casually and like authoritatively. There was a book, Every Man's Battle. There was like an every man's battle and every woman's battle. Okay, some of us deeply conservative people remember that bit of trauma. And I remember reading the Every Man's Battle book because I was like, I want to know what they're thinking. And there was this analogy of these like vessels or cisterns or whatever, that every man has like 5 or 7 of these like sexual vessels. Did you know this? You have these.
I did not read this book.
No, but it's in you. Did you know? They're there.
Okay.
And like, it is a woman's job to like fill these vessels. And if you're not making sure that all of these vessels are filled in your male partner's life, then it is your fault. If they cheat on you, if they are addicted to porn, if they are addicted to masturbation, it is because you are not giving them everything they need sexually, right? Like seriously, Grant mouth open in awe.
That's pretty shocking.
Yeah, no, but it was real. Like that was really, and like I had a lot of friends that bought into that. So going into my marriage with my partner, who's a man, you know, I had some of that baggage that I had to carry. But what was very interesting is I then realized once we got married, my husband, maybe he has like 2 vessels compared to like what I was told was supposed to be 7, where like I'm thinking, oh, we're going to have sex all the time. And like, this is going to be the best, you know, and maybe in the beginning, you know, we're young and crazy. But after a while, he was like, I'd like to read a book. And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah, book sounds nice. I'll catch you tomorrow, you know? And I became really grateful for that because it wasn't my duty. And then we've been married for 13 years. So as like, thank you. As our relationship has grown and developed and like our libidos have changed and 2 children and all of that, like now I'm less interested. And there are times where I feel really guilty and I'm like, I'm really sorry. I just am not really feeling it. And he's like, and then I'll be like, but I'll try. Like, cause remember, I got to keep these vessels full because Lord forbid, you know? And he's like, no, I don't want to be physically intimate with you then. Like, this needs to be not just a consensual thing, but like a loving act from both of us. And if you're just doing this out of some sense of obligation, why would I want to?
That makes so much
kind
sense.
Of relationship, right? It makes so much sense. But then again, like I know a lot of people who are still playing the other game of, you know, and I think about particularly these poor women who are not being sexually satisfied or quite frankly, are being sexually manipulated and taken advantage of in marriage relationships. And we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
So, and to piggyback off of that, I have found, like you asked me, what have been some of the most intimate experiences? Some of the most intimate experiences for me have not been the ones where I'm having sex. Like, one of the most intimate experiences for me was the birth of my 2 kids, because like I was eyes locking with my husband, just watching him adore me as I'm bringing in, you know, life into our family. And then for our second child, he came out like in 45 minutes and there was nobody else there. It was just me and him for 45 minutes. The midwife didn't make it. My child was born on the toilet, so we call him our toilet baby.
Do his face.
Yeah, we're like, you're a little toilet baby. Yay! But my husband was the one who like caught our son, you know, together, and it was just the 2 of us, and that's the most intimate thing. Like I can't manufacture that experience. Like, yeah. That it was just so beautiful and life-giving. Yeah. So, and we can't do that again. Like you can have sex again, but I can't, like, we're never going to give birth to Ezra together again. Yeah. So I've been blabbing, but I would say within my marriage relationship, those And I think that it's so important. And then I want to hand it over to you because I want to, no, it's important. And then I'll talk about other intimate relationships, but it's so important for married people. And I don't care what your partnership looks like it's really important to know that because sex changes, you change. And if all you're kind of looking for or what you define intimacy to be is just sex exclusively, you will be disappointed. I can promise you will.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about the Psalm of the virtuous woman, where at the end it says beauty fades, right? And beauty fades, and in every gender, beauty fades and things change and body changes and your ability to be sexually intimate changes. But if there's not a base of other ways of intimacy, then you're always going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
And sexual intimacy is always better when it's on a foundation of deeper and broader expressions of intimacy.
Yeah. Absolutely. It makes me think of, there's a book I was reading recently, Out of the Shadows, Reimagining Gay Men's Lives by Walt Odets, I think is his name. And he talks about viewing sex as a conversation. He's talking about this as a psychologist engaged, helping a lot of gay men. And he stress the importance of sex as conversation rather than as an activity. I think he characterized it, he called it genital combat, which is an interesting phrase that's always stuck with me. But the idea that it's an athletic thing, it's a pleasure thing, and it's not actually a conversation with another person. That sort of strips it of the intimacy that sex is supposed to have.
Love it. If you're not familiar with side B conversations and stuff, I hope that this is a bit of a oh, they're not as stuck up as I thought they were. They talk about sex. Some of them even have sex. Wow. Okay, so anyway, Grant, I want to throw it back at you because my situation is obviously different.
I feel like we've got the opposite situation. Bi married woman.
Yes.
Single.
Which there's still so much I could say, but yes, single. And, and many layers of queer identity for you. So what does side B intimacy look like for you? How would you define it in your own life? And what have been examples of that?
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of the intimacy that I've received over the past many years has been in the context of relationship with my friends and with my broader community. I've been really blessed to live with young families for the past 7 or 8 years.
Wow.
So there's always, it's really fun. I get to be sort of an uncle. And so there's always been at least one child under the age of 3 in the house at all times.
You. And you chose that.
I have chose both times. Yes. And that is a kind of intimacy. The families I've lived with have offered to cook food and we all enjoy a meal together. I feel included in a family that isn't my biological family, and that feels really intimate. I know the little baby boy that I live with right now, he crawls up to me and touches my foot, which is the signal for me to pick him up.
Oh, I love it.
Which is so sweet. And we have this thing where we mirror each other and I don't know, wiggle our heads and smile, and we just like each other a lot.
My uterus is crying.
So that's the kind of intimacy that's meant so much to me. I know I also have a community of friends in St. Louis where I live. And I know that if I really need a trip to the airport, or if I am sick with COVID and need something, a friend can drop something off. My friends really care for me in that way. I also have a regular Tuesday night drinks with my friends, which is I love the structure of that. I get to go to a friend's house and we all drink and gab, which has been really, really fun. But so that's the way that intimacy sort of fits into my life right now and expresses itself. When it comes to the most intimate moments that I've experienced, a lot of them have been in the context of confession.
I love this. You said this yesterday to me. I was like, ooh, I need to hear more.
Well, I think confession is sort of taken on a different weight now that I have entered the Catholic Church 2 years ago. So I have like a sacramental confession that's a part of my life. But even in the context of conversation with friends, sharing something really vulnerable with someone, something I hadn't shared before, or something that feels really dark and precious. Those are moments where have felt really, really intimate to me.
Wow.
I know I was in the Sacrament of Reconciliation several months ago, and I was bringing to confession something that I had never confessed before. It had happened many, many years ago, and I had gone to confession a whole bunch of times since, and so like I was good, I should have felt good about it, or I should have felt okay about it. I should, but you know what I mean? But it was just plaguing me for some reason. And so I brought it to a friend before I went to sacramental confession. And he's like, thank you so much for sharing with me. And that was a really intimate moment in our friendship. And then I brought it to the confessional, and the moment when the priest said something like, I want you to know that your sin is forgiven. Like that moment was incredibly intimate. I think I was crying or something. I was behind a screen, so no one saw, but so just me and the Lord. But,
Jesus saw.
Yeah, Jesus saw. But yeah, that moment was really intimate for me. So I think confession always feels really, really intimate. Sharing memories that have been so formative for me that no one knows when they look at me.
Yes.
Sharing that with someone, giving them a peek into my inner life. Feels really intimate.
So like what words would you describe? Like you gave amazing examples, but I'm just thinking like what is intimacy in those situations? Like what are the words? What does it do? Hopefully for you and the other person. Like it's vulnerability.
Yeah. And I've often thought of vulnerability. I mean, if you take it very literally, etymologically, it's openness to being wounded. Like you can be really hurt.
Wow.
You hand someone something that's very sharp and dangerous, and they can really hurt you with it if they want. And so it requires a lot of trust. And it feels like it unburdens you. Like if you can trust this with them, then your circle of safety increases.
I was going to say like intimacy is vulnerability, and then it's trust. Like it's freedom. Like there's freedom in it. And a thing that I was thinking about when I think about other examples of intimacy is I have an eye disorder. And so reading and writing is like my enemy. I hate it. And it has plagued me all of my life. And I shared this there was another breakout session for like invisible disabilities and chronic illness, which was beautiful. And it was always something I was embarrassed of, and I didn't want anyone to know. I had a lot of things that I didn't want anyone to know growing up. We're unpacking stuff. Yeah. So, it was something I hid and I didn't want anyone to know until I got to college, when I was away from my family, who were the only ones who knew that I had this, who were the only ones who helped me. And now I'm by myself and I need to read large textbooks and write long papers. And I was like, I can't do this. Like, I physically can't do this without being vulnerable to somebody else right now. So I asked for my friends to pray for me, and I told them about it. And then out of nowhere, friends were coming up to me and saying like, hey, can we wake up early with you before class and read you the chapter of the book that you have to read? And they weren't even in the class. but they sat with me. I'm going to cry.
Yeah.
They sat with me in my room early in the morning and just would read to me long sections of, books that they didn't need to read. And they had tons of other things that they needed to read. So it was the vulnerability of putting myself in a place very humbly where I had to listen to my friends read to me.
Yeah.
But then also receiving their love and receiving their ability to look at me as an equal, even in a place of vulnerability. It was so freeing. Not to mention, I got to do my readings and write my papers. And I graduated with very good grades. And I can attribute that to the ways that I was able to be intimate with people that I loved.
I love that. It reminds me of my favorite biblical passage is the story of the raising of Lazarus.
Whenever Grant talks about this story,
there's different
You're going
angles.
to church, y'all. We're about to go to church.
No. But thinking about how the miracle is inherently communal, because there are 3 commands Jesus gives in the story of the raising of Lazarus. And the first and the third are to the community around the tomb, not to Lazarus. The first is to roll the stone away. And the third is to unbind him and let him go. And so at each end of Jesus's command to Lazarus is a command to his friends and family to make the way for him and to release him from bondage. And so truth, I think of the raising of Lazarus in terms of truth telling, in terms of coming out all the time. That's the thing that comes to mind.
We need
for
a whole
me.
Episode on that.
I think that miracle has so much to say to coming out, but I think that makes truth telling an act of intimacy, like something that can be so incredibly intimate and vulnerable. I think the idea that someone was like taking away the clothes that were probably like stuck to his skin.
Wow.
And he couldn't move. So
intimacy is care as well. Like it's giving and receiving care. And I'm thinking about the vulnerability, the sharp object. Well, the recipient of that object has to handle it with care. And I think about that in relational intimacy, in the ways that we see ourselves moving throughout the world, but also bringing it back to sex. Like that is sexual intimacy. And that's what I didn't see in the cistern vessel thing of like, you're giving some of the most vulnerable pieces and parts of yourself to somebody else. You're giving this object and saying, hey, like I'm humbly giving this to you. And now you're in some ways at the mercy of their care. And hopefully the response is an act of care and isn't an act of harm or exploiting, that person or that gift. So I think intimacy is on both ends, care, giving and receiving, helping, humility and vulnerability.
And that extends so far beyond sex. Like it surely encompasses sex. And sex can definitely be intimate.
Is intimate.
I assume.
I assure you.
But I think that makes intimacy so much bigger. And if we take sexual intimacy the way Jesus often took sexual intimacy as saying something about God's relationship with us, how the Bible speaks of it is God's relationship with us. That's an intimacy that's open to all of us in relation to God now in some sense, but in the resurrection, that's the kind of intimacy that will flood everything, like that kind of vulnerability. Our circle of safety will expand so as to encompass everything. We'll be totally free.
Can't wait.
Sounds
lovely. So how do you, it sounds like you have an amazing supportive community, but I'm sure you have had people share with you like how do you know, ask the questions of like, how do you deal with the fact that you don't have intimacy, you know, assuming that that's the case, or like taking pity on you because like you're not pursuing a marriage relationship and you're not going to have like sexual intimacy. Like, how do you reconcile that in yourself? And how do you kind of explain that to other people as you're also in the process of reconciling that with yourself?
Yeah. Ooh, emphasis on process. Because every time I come to any queer Christian conference, I had 15 different crushes. Every time it's rough.
True.
No,
we were at something together and someone said something and then I looked at Grant and I was like, and crush number one.
Yeah.
We've been here a whole freaking hour.
Grant is in love again. I fall in love with people in commercials. But yes, I think, what was the question? We got distracted.
Get you in love. How do you, in your process?
Oh, yes.
Process of reconciling.
Yeah. So I'm very much in process. I think we can give the impression that we fully arrived at some perspective on intimacy.
So important to mention.
And
so important.
We have not arrived. It's a continual process that's just going to extend for the rest of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get intimacy? And at certain points in my life, even now, I feel really unsatisfied in some ways with the intimacy that I'm receiving. But so I think it's something, a way that I've thought about it. And this might just be because I'm an Enneagram 4. So take it with a grain of salt. I'm very okay with longing and yearning and unfinished business and stuff like that. It makes me special and mysterious.
Good poetry.
Yes. How will I be an artist if you take away my sadness? But the idea that even if I were to have the intimacy, not just that I needed, but the intimacy that I wanted at every moment, it's in the moment, it's not going to fulfill me. In the moment, I'll realize my longing extends so far beyond this person, this act. It can't satisfy it. I think love in so many ways is really just a kind of unfulfilled longing, or a longing that is continually being fulfilled, but it never stops. And I really think that's my vision of what the resurrected life is going to be, like longing that continues, and it's a journey that keeps going. Gregory of Nyssa calls it like a sort of infinite journeying into God, epictasis. I think that's what the resurrection is going to be. So I don't think that longing is actually something that's a part of the fallen world. I think that's just something about being a finite creature caught in the embrace of an infinite God.
So it's almost like it's pain with pleasure, in the sense of like, it reminds you that there's always going to be something greater.
Yeah. There's always so much more, because God is always so much more.
The best is yet to come, as we learned from, it was Karen.
Yes.
The best is yet to come.
It gets better.
Yeah. Yes. It gets better. Exactly. Oh, I love that. So I have a question also. Sorry, not to keep focusing on you, Grant, but
gosh, this wasn't an interview, was it?
This
was a dialogue.
Well, I'll jump in, but how do you ask for intimacy?
Do you want to go first?
I can't say what I was going to say. You go first.
I don't know. I think the struggle that so many have when asking for intimacy is that you don't want to feel clingy or desperate or needy. And I think in a very real sense, everyone is really desperate for intimacy. So we're all feeling that. I think it can be awkward and maybe unhelpful to ask for a level of intimacy that you haven't worked toward with another person. Intimacy without any story. Yeah. So I think intimacy, now that I think about it, intimacy sort of requires a shared story for it to be intimacy. So jumping straight into like a physical affection or an emotional affection that has no real background can be really dangerous and can be really awkward. And so I try not to do that in my best moments, as much as I want the kind of intimacy I want. It's mostly just a reflection and not advice. So take that with a grain of salt. But there are ways that you found that you can, or people that are in your lives where you can say, hey, I need something from you. Yeah. I think that in itself, asking requires so much trust.
Absolutely.
And vulnerability.
Yeah, totally. I feel the same way. And I think asking in the context of my marriage for intimacy is always super weird. Like, you don't think that it would be weird, but it actually is very weird. And then I think also asking and longing for intimacy outside of my marriage, it's weird, but it seems like it's more weird because of the way that our Western society has told us it's supposed to be weird. Like, recently I've been feeling, I have anxiety, so I'm always feeling anxious, but I've been having this anxiety over, like, my family doesn't look like the standard American family, because it's me, my husband, our 2 kids in our house, and then my best friend. And she is in our family. Like, literally any way that you can describe somebody being in someone's family, she's in it. And we get questions and, side glances, and it's fine, and I deal with it. But at the same time, like, that's not how I grew up. Like, we barely had like family friends over our house, let alone, have somebody live with us and be a part of our family. So to my family, she's just like our roommate. But to us, she's an entity all of our own that we honestly don't even know how to put words to, which I love, because it's like, it reminds me of David and Jonathan a lot. And I was thinking about what you were saying when you were talking about Jesus and Lazarus, and that whole story of like, there's a temptation, and I might step on some toes, but there's a temptation that I've seen to kind of write in between the lines of David and Jonathan's story. But I actually think if we're broadening the understanding of intimacy, I don't need to see David and Jonathan as like sexual partners or like these romantic partners. Like, the fact that David says that he loved Jonathan more than some of his wives, to me is like, wow, that's intimate. Like, you can have that depth of intimacy. And in many ways, like, we have that in our family of like, I don't know what to call our Masha, that's her name, because there's such a depth of intimacy in that relationship that there's not an American or an English word for it. And if you have it, do tell me, but there's not, and so, it just makes me think of like how hopefully all of us can question and broaden what are the narratives of intimacy that we've been told, and how can we rewrite them through the lens of the intimacy that God has created. And I would say the intimacy that Jesus offers us too. Yeah. Which kind of leads me to what I would love for us to kind of talk about next is, what does it look like to be intimate in our faith with God and with Jesus? We're at a Christian conference, right? Like, we should probably bring him up every now and again. So like, what does intimacy look like for you in your faith practice with Jesus? What has he offered you?
Well, that's probably changed over many years. Part of one of the threads that hooked me and got me entering the Catholic Church is Lectio Divina, and sort of imaginative, like contemplative prayer. And so I had a really positive experience with some Catholic campus ministers in college. And they suggested, like, one of them is a nun now. She's like so invested in her faith. It's beautiful. She talked about an experience she had where she imagined herself in a biblical story and relating to Jesus and talking with him and seeing his face change and like having such an intimate experience face to face with Jesus. And she like got ice cream with Jesus, like it was an interesting, like, she had a whole interaction with a person, Jesus. And so I thought one day that I was going to do that. So I was living in Southern California at the time, and there was a mountain. It was a big old hill in the area, and you had to spend like an hour walking up it to get to the very top. And at the top, there was this sort of outcropping that I probably shouldn't have gone out on, but I did. And I sat there and I took a notebook and I took my headphones and I think I took a Bible, and I sat there and I had an imaginative experience, a prayer experience with, I think it was the pool at Bethesda, the man who was healed by Jesus at the pool of Bethesda. And Jesus asks him, I might be mixing up stories, so don't quote me on this, but
it's imaginative. We can do it. We can go there.
But he says, what do you want me to do for you? Is the question he asks the man. And so I imagined Jesus asking me that question. What do you want from me? What do you want me to do for you? And that it was like I was experiencing Jesus being vulnerable with me, being intimate with me. Wow. And of course, I'm a crier, so it's just like tears flowing down my face. I was out and no one was around me. I think some hikers walked past me and like stumbled away. They're like, oh, he's but
too intimate.
Yeah,
gotta go.
Too intimate. But those kind of experiences have always been really, really powerful for me. Really,
it reminds me of book plug, not my book, but an amazing, amazing book that I'm rereading, I think for the third time, called Spiritual Abuse and Religious Addiction. It's this little tiny book that probably most people have not heard of, but is fantastic. And one of the opening stories is about this woman who calls on her priests to come to her home because her husband doesn't go to church and he doesn't pray as much as she does. And she's very concerned about his eternal soul and his spiritual health. And she brings these priests in and she's like, we need to have a prayer meeting. We need to like pray over him and cast out this demon of whatever. And they said as soon as they got there, they realized that she was the one that needed the prayer, not her husband. And that she had become so addicted to praying and to fasting and to church going that she wasn't actually allowing God to be intimately a part of her life. Like she was segmenting and she was using it as a tool to cover up her own hurt and vulnerability. So instead of praying for him, they prayed for her. And then during the prayer, this woman has this vision where she's like, I saw Jesus come to my house, and he came and I thought, oh, my house is dirty. I should have cleaned it if I knew my Lord and Savior was coming. But he walked past her and then he said, where's your husband? And then I don't know if she answered, whatever. But then she looked for Jesus and she's like, where is he? Where is he? And then she finds him sitting on the couch with her husband watching football, which is what she had complained about him doing the whole time. And she realized that's what Jesus wanted to do all along. He just wanted to be with us in our everyday lives, in all of our situations, in the intimacy of things, not just in the pomp and circumstance. Anyway, so beautiful. Right? It's a great book. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left and we would love to open the floor up for questions. So we have a lovely gentleman here who's going to pass around a mic. If anyone has any questions on the floor, please feel free to share. And then we'll check the ones also on the app. There's a lot. Well, here we go. The first person who asked a live question, I will give one of our lovely Kaleidoscope water bottles, chosen family water bottles too. So have a question ready, folks. Sorry, online people. Okay. So let's do online first. We'll grab one of the first questions. Can you read one of them?
Yeah, let me find one real quick.
Unless anyone here has one ready to go. Got it? Okay. You keep looking and you get a
Okay,
water
perfect.
bottle.
The second person can get the water bottle. I'm good, actually.
Okay.
I want to ask a question. I guess I've heard quite a lot about intimacy in general, but I was curious about physical intimacy on a side B perspective, because obviously it doesn't need to just be sexual.
So
There's-
good.
Yeah.
That's a really good question. Do you want to start or do you want me to?
You can start if you'd like.
Okay. Yeah, no, I love that question. And, I want Grant to have more of the floor, but I think it's still important for there to be physical intimacy for married people. That's not just their spouse too. Wild concept. So like, I'm a very physical touch person. So I love like holding my friends' hands and like, hugging and embracing and watching a movie, like snuggled up against, a friend of mine. And let me be honest, like there are times where I have to realize, okay, there needs to be physical boundaries because maybe this is not the most healthy of physical relationship, or, this isn't the moment for that. And I need to honor my spouse, obviously, but I think it's so important for me to have other physical relationships with other people that isn't necessarily sexual. And hopefully it's a gift that I can also give my friends, that they don't feel like, oh, well, now you can only touch this one person. Like I'll never be able to have like a long embrace with you anymore because you belong to somebody else. Like, no, like we're all a part of this family. So I'm all about as much physical touch as I can get. My friends know it.
Yeah, I'm a pretty physically affectionate person as well. It's something that I really appreciate and I long for a lot. I think I have to temper myself because it can become a way to chase an experience rather than to engage with the person.
That's
and
good.
That's always dangerous.
Yeah.
Because that is objectifying, even if it's not about sex.
Wow.
Because you can make the other person a thing that actually just brings you comfort.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's something I think about a lot. But yeah, I have friends who I'm physically affectionate with, and that's really meaningful for me. I think one of the painful parts of intimacy in our modern cultural concept is our context is desirability politics. And so this idea that like if you're prettier, if you're more like conventionally attractive or like stereotypically attractive, then intimacy is easier for you to access. And so that's something I want to be really careful about, and how I engage with other people. I don't want to offer intimacy just because people make me feel good. I want to offer intimacy to people because I'm trying to be Christ. I'm trying to live as Christ would live. And he offered physical intimacy to people that the culture did not expect him to offer to all the time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So those are some of the things that I think about.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thanks. We'll take one from the online real quick. So one of the questions I really liked, there was another question more broadly about side B. Like I said, we'd love to chat with you afterward about side B in general, but more specifically about intimacy. The question is, what can the broader LGBT community learn from side B Christians about the importance of non-sexual intimacy?
Wow.
So many years ago, this is my fourth conference. At the beginning of the conference, I accidentally lied to people. I said it was my third, but it's my fourth. There was one online. And at one of my first experiences, Julie Rogers was speaking, and she talked about, and she had been long involved in the side B world, and she had become side A before she was speaking at the conference. And she talked about the way that side A and side B can support each other, sort of side by side instead of side versus side.
Yes.
Which there are difficulties with that. I don't want to paint an overly rosy picture about what that across ideological lines can look like. But one of the things that she said was that side B people have been forced to and have chosen to radically rethink what it looks like to be involved in relationships and have a community. And I think that's a really radical potential of side B is that it's not that side A folks can't do that. Side A folks, of course, are rethinking relationships and trying to figure out how to be supported. But I think it's interesting that side B people in many ways are constrained to think about these things. We're forced to rethink because the system just doesn't work for a lot of us. And so I think that's something specific that side B folks might have to offer. That does require a lot of conversation across ideological lines, which is often very triggering for people, very difficult. But that's why I like to come to this conference. I learn so much.
For sure.
And so it's a conversation I like.
I'll add, I also think like to the broader queer community, which was the question, is like most of us are single. Like statistically, most LGBTQ folks are single. So whether you choose it or not, like we all do have to kind of rethink what does it look like to be intimate. And I think a gift is because side B folks have made it a conscientious choice, then it's something all of us can glean from, because we're not all assured that even if you hold aside a theology or affirming theology, that you're going to be in a partnership or a sexual relationship. So maybe one more quick question from the audience. Yes. Sure. And you're going to get the bottle. I don't care what you say. No, I'm just kidding.
You know what? I would love the bottle.
Only if you want. Okay, great.
So you spoke a little bit about how intimacy requires vulnerability and how that leaves you kind of open to being wounded. And I guess I wondered if you'd ever been in situations where you wanted to be intimate with a particular person or a group of people, but you weren't sure whether you could trust them and be vulnerable with them, and how you went about kind of feeling that out and setting some boundaries to be able to try and do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So figuring out intimacy with maybe a history of hurt or difficulty or conflict, and how to figure that out moving forward. Yeah, I think there's been it requires a lot of tough conversations and a lot of courage in those conversations. I know I've had conversations with friends. A friend of mine, for instance, like really hurt me. There was a comment he made that he maybe half meant or meant in a different way. And it was related to a lot of other comments that had really hurt me in the past. And I said, I'm sorry, I need to take a break. I have to figure this out. And we didn't talk for a few months. Like that was the boundary I had to set. And it was really painful too, because at points we would try and reconnect, or he would try and reconnect. And I said, and I would have to say it like, I can't right now. I don't have the capacity to do that. It's not necessarily a value judgment on the person, but you only have so much energy to give. And reconfiguring boundaries and figuring out a relationship again requires a lot of effort. And if you have an already full life, it requires a lot more time. And waiting becomes really important. I don't know if I have a lot of specific guidance on that, but that's something that I've struggled with, or I've been through. And then it was baby steps back into relationship. So we've talked more afterward, and we've had sort of more stilted, formal kind of conversations, trying to figure out the kind of relationship we were going to have. But
thanks, Grant. Thanks for the question. And I wish we were like 10 minutes should be fine, right? Unfortunately, we're out of time. So, but this has been a lovely discussion. Thank you all for being intimate with us for a little bit and hearing our stories and sharing yours with us. And we will try to, maybe address some of these questions over the app if we can figure out how to do that later on,
Yeah.
because I'm technically illiterate. So thanks for coming, everyone.
Yes. Oh, before you go, Kaleidoscope's socials. Just to connect.
Is at kaleidoscope.usa. Yes, that's what we are. So follow us on Instagram.
And my besetting sin is Twitter. So if you follow me on the Grant Hartley, you can also enable me. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.